Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition. And today we greet you live from the All America city of Morrisville, all around the world, in North Carolina, the largest state in the Union. Our show will soon become a part of Roku TV network. And today we want to talk, as we always do, about global affairs, innovation, and the post COVID world that we live in. But before I do, I want to continue our discussion on Russia and Ukraine, as we are still seeing Prime Minister President Putin invade the eastern Ukraine. And the issue I want to talk today is about sanctions. Now, I wasn't really prepared for the monologue today, but the bottom line is that Crimea, when we imposed sanctions against Russia against Crimea, we imposed tough sanctions, and it did weaken the Russian economy. It actually hurt them because we made it harder for the Russian banks to get loans. We were trying to make it harder to export goods into Russia, and their economy did shrink. And Putin's approval rating went from about 80% after the invasion to about 60%, and it continued to fall. But the economy started to rebound, and obviously the sanctions didn't work to get Putin to not invade again the Ukraine. So the question becomes, will President Biden's tough talk about new sanctions really work? What would those new sanctions be? Well, some ideas are that they would actually, not allow foreign companies to buy oil from Russia, which would really hinder their revenue sources. It could once again make it harder for Russian banks to get loans and could completely close off their markets to exports. But as we continue to fight Russia on these issues, we also have to realize that Russia has close allies with China, and they can actually surpass some of these sanctions by selling their oil and gas to China and also by buying Chinese technology. So only time will tell whether the tough talk of sanctions will be enough to put fear in the mind of Putin that he should not invade anymore. He's obviously made his decision. We're waiting to see whether the troop escalation will improve. We will be talking more about this on Chris Grekin's international show with Sasha Starr, but we do talk about international issues on World Edition. So we'll see where we go from here with the continuing monitoring the situation in Russia and the Ukraine. With us today, we have Mark Lee and Chris and the team to talk about sanctions. And I may have left some things out, but the bottom line is that we tried sanctions in 2014 and they didn't work. So are they going to work now? That's the question, right? So what do you think, guys?
Well, okay. So, Mark, did you want to
No,
go
you go
ahead?
ahead, Chris. You've got the military experience. I will defer to you.
Okay. So let me tell you something about sanctions, and I think this is important. Is that sanctions are really powerless if you have a national will. So if the national will is to take parts of Ukraine, then sanctions will do nothing. Yes, people will have to buckle down, but we had sanctions during World War II. I mean, from the standpoint of we had to buckle down and rubber and silk and those types of things, and we just kind of made it work. We just kind of made it work, and that's exactly what the Russians are doing. I mean, the propaganda gear. Remember, TASS News. TASS News is totally Russian. Is a Russian propaganda network. And they're putting out that, hey, we haven't invaded anybody. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at the Russian TASS News, they haven't invaded not 1 inch of Ukraine. What they've done is they've taken back those things that were improperly annexed by Ukraine whenever the annexation of those parts of Ukraine, Donetsk, and those areas. So they haven't invaded anybody. And this is what I said about a week ago or so. Is that he's not going to invade Kyiv. He's going to slowly but surely take pieces. So he took Crimea. Now he's going to take Donetsk. He's going to take Lugansk. He's going to take those areas. And then slowly but surely, it's going to be to the point where that camel's nose and then the head and then the neck and everything is going to be in that tent, to the point where we can sanction all day long. Ukraine has coal. Ukraine has oil. They take that country. Then slowly but surely. And if you take a look, I will bet you Donetsk and Lugansk, those areas that they took, I'll bet you that they have a lot of coal mines there. They have a lot of areas that are very, very rich in that arena. So
Yes.
that area is going to be a
And
yeah. So go
yes.
ahead.
No, good. And we have Sasha Starter. Sasha, we're asking about his sanctions. We tried sanctions before; they didn't work. Some new ideas have been imposing tougher sanctions. President Biden saying freedom has costs. And some of these ideas would be, basically blocking Russia's government from borrowing money in Western financial markets, cutting off two large Russian banks from the U.S. financial system, preventing foreign companies from buying foreign oil. Do you think any of these things matter in Putin's decision, or is he just going to say, "Look, you tried sanctions before. If it hurts me bad, I'll just pivot to China and try to continue to grow my economy my own way"?
Thank you, Steve. I would think about something else. How Putin, which has no support in the world whatsoever, except maybe North Korea, maybe Iran, not even China, how he could do all that when all the West is being united against him? Is West really united against Putin? Is US really all up and firing against Putin? It may not be
Yeah.
so.
I mean, one of the things
Listen
is,
to the latest clips from Donald Trump. So he incites now Republican Party to support Putin. He's talking about his genius. So he's compromised by KGB since the late 70s. And he keeps going on and on and on. When he went penniless by the 2000, he was making up through the Russian mafia's money, through Arabs' money. He made it. He became, with Russian help, a president of the United States. Now it's a payback time, baby. Deliver the goods. Trump, if he would be in his second term now, he would dismantle NATO. The NATO would not exist today. Period. Not reform NATO or make them pay more money or whatever. No. Not of that nonsense. He would dismantle NATO for good. Now he wants to dismantle the American public opinion for good. He wants to tell, and he already told yesterday, what a genius Putin is, and he's openly supporting what he's doing. And I think that Biden, beside all his troubles that he has everywhere, now he will be backstabbed by a Republican Party with Donald Trump, and he will not be able to do anything of whatever he's trying to do. That's a major issue, not that what Putin said when he was asked whether he's recognizing just these territories that want to be independent, but all Lugansk region and Donetsk region. Putin was very clever. What he said that, look, we recognize these two regions. If we do that, we recognize their constitution. And in their constitution, it clearly says it's Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. So obviously, we recognize both of these oblasts. Thank you very much. Good luck and enjoy yourself.
I hear you. Hey, Chris. Yeah, I hear you, and Sasha. Chris, I did have a quick question, everything, which is that definitely we've got some folks that are actually doing some of these sanctions that you just talked about, but they seem to be very weak sanctions, and they're already getting critics on them for that, because Boris Johnson just came out and definitely said that he was going to have some powerful sanctions earlier against the Ukraine. But apparently the ones that have come out currently are very mild, because they say that the UK has slapped asset freezes and travel bans on 3 wealthy Russians and sanctioned 5 Russian banks in response to Putin's decision to recognize the 2 breakaway regions of eastern Ukraine. I'm sorry, but maybe it's just me, Chris, and everything. I can see maybe the banks because banks can be very large and all of that, but I don't care if they're like Elon Musk kind of wealth. I mean, what is slapping bans on three wealthy Russians going to do and all of that? Because I'm sitting there as I'm reading this, I'm going like, it's three wealthy folks. I get
What's
that, but
Hang on,
what?
what's the problem with the banks? Why is it okay to you're not okay with it having to the banks, but it's okay for the wealthy people, Mark?
No, I'm just trying to figure it out. I mean, the banks, because banks are going to be in charge of a lot more money. That's my point. But it's three wealthy individuals. Imagining maybe they're in the same category as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and some of these other folks. But I'm like, who are these folks that you're having the travel ban on, and why are we picking on three folks? Russia is a fairly big country. I mean, and I'm sure there are many more wealthy people other than these three. So my point is, why are you picking on these particular three? And who are these three?
Well,
And that's Chris is like, I'm trying to figure out who these
sure.
three are.
No. So we're talking about an oligarchy here, right, Shaquille? It's an oligarchy. I mean, that's basically why. I mean, the banks are beholden to the people, right? So they go out and they do things from the standpoint of the people. But the oligarchs are the ones that really control the flow of economic wealth between, and they're the ones that really flow that GDP and whatever else. So I think that's what they're trying to do. I'm not saying it's successful. You know, it never seems to be successful. These sanctions that they go into, and I'll tell you something. This is just my personal opinion, whatever else. NATO can sit there and say, we're going to do this and do that, and Germany's going to do this and do that, and we're not going to certify that gas line, and we're not going to do this. But I'll tell you, I don't trust the French. The French, I never liked them. I never liked them. I think Macron, I think the French I think they are the worst part of NATO. They ought to kick them the hell out of there, because I mean, they've never been a part of NATO, and they're constantly, I'm telling you, they're doing backsided trade with Russia. I'm telling you right now, they do it with Iran and they're doing it with Russia. Russia's going to France.
A long time ago, they actually left NATO and then they joined back.
Yeah. Administrative. They were administrative, Sasha. Right. So, but you notice. So I'll tell you something about the French. And this is, I know that the thing is about a Russian and Ukraine, and I get this. But let me tell you about something about the French. The French are little backstabbers. They sat there. And I hope we have French audience, not the people now. This is the leaders. Let me tell you what they did. El Dorado Canyon, 1986. I was stationed in Germany as part of that operation. They wouldn't allow us to overfly their territory, France, because they said, oh, we can't allow that, because we were going to bomb Libya because of terrorist activity that they had done in Germany against U.S. forces. Right. So we decided we're going to bomb Benina Airfield and a couple other areas in El Dorado Canyon. They said, no, you can't do that. There was a political cartoon that came out, and basically it said invasion 1944. And it had a little line between Britain and Normandy. And then it says invasion 1986. They had this long line going 3,500 miles around France and Spain, all the way through the Med to get to Libya. I don't trust them. I'm telling you right now, the U.S. is putting sanctions and everyone's putting sanctions, and the French are sitting back and they're doing backhanded trade with Russia right now as we speak. They are doing contracts with them. They're giving them whatever. So Russia, we can talk about all these sanctions stuff, but not everybody sits there and does sanctions. I'll tell you the book to read. Prisoner's Dilemma. You want to read a good book? Read Prisoner's Dilemma by William Poundstone. That will tell you exactly what international politics is all about. Exactly what it's all about. Because it's like, it's sorry.
Chris, I wanted to say something about the oligarchs that you mentioned, these three people.
Yes.
They're not just average oligarch and not randomly picked people, not at all. The Rottenberg brothers were sparring judo partners of Vladimir Putin in his youth in St. Petersburg. So they are his inner cycle. The Timchenko, he's been associated with Putin since the late 80s, early 90s. He is sitting on the Swiss-based oil trader. And immensely wealthy man. He has Finnish citizenship, just in case. And this three is where you would start. Now, the next would come Deripaska, the next would come many other oligarchs associated with Putin, but this three is really his inner circle.
So,
well, speaking about just to add something about the sanctions overall, now let's be realistic about something. Russia is sitting on $1 trillion of cash and gold reserves. Has no debts.
God bless you.
Has no debts. Okay.
Yep.
So, so if you will compare the financial standing of the United States and Russia, you would probably start crying because the United States is awash with debts of nobody actually knows exact figure because it could be as much as $200 trillion dollars or $250 trillion. But at that point, the numbers are so great that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it doesn't.
You will not repay 200 trillions or 250 or 750 trillion dollars. It just doesn't matter. It's already going into cosmos, and all the normal figures lose their sense.
Shaquille, I know I wanted to say something, but I want to just point out this one thing. Every year, how much do you think we pay? Now, this is U.S. Social Security. How much do you think we pay in U.S. Social Security every year? Every year, how much? What do you guys think? A couple billion, maybe 200 billion.
Much
$1 trillion $1 trillion a year is paid in Social Security. About 20, and this is a figure I used to know, but I don't know. It's about like 19-20% of it goes to individuals that never paid into the system. Now, some of them, they're disabled. They need that money. I get that. But there are people that play that system and they get it without having to pay anything into it. And when I thought $1 trillion, and I worked for Social Security, so I know those numbers. It's absolutely amazing. $1 trillion a year. I don't think Russia pays $1 trillion a year to their people in any type of Social Security, but that's just me. That's a guess on my part. So anyways, I'm sorry, Shaquille.
So this is just a picture how the sanctions are ineffective, and the individual sanctions, what they did against these three oligarchs, that makes a lot of sense. Now, to punish Russia with these overall sanctions, Russia can withstand them for a long time. The oil is approaching now $100 a barrel. Immense cash and gold reserves, no debts. I fail to see how you can get successful sanctions against Russia, really. Shaquille, please.
So the comment I was going to make was about your comments about Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah, sure, please do.
Now, look, he's the former president. I get it, Sasha, you don't like the man. But
I don't like anybody who has been in the orbit.
If an asteroid hits planet Earth, it's not Donald Trump's fault. If there's a solar flare on the sun, it's not Donald Trump's fault. You can't blame everything on Donald Trump. Justin Trudeau turning into a dictator, that's not Trump's fault. And you know what was really not Donald Trump's fault? Let me give you an idea. It's an example of something that Donald Trump wouldn't have done. And you know why we know he wouldn't have done it? Because he didn't do it. When Vladimir Putin said, you know what would be a really good idea for us as a country? Let's build Nord Stream 2. Let's build a pipeline that doesn't go through Ukraine. So therefore, Ukraine don't have any ability to hurt our oil supply into Europe. You know what Donald Trump said? No. And you know what your beloved geriatric fool said? The current president? Absolutely. What a fantastic idea. So he puts the section.
Technically speaking, it was a deal between Russia and Germany.
When he puts the
I don't see
sanction
how
on
the
Russia
presidents get into it.
Biden puts the sanction on Russia now. Have oil prices moved since the sanction was announced? A couple of dollars. That's it. That they're back at the prices they were at a few weeks ago. They're high, but they're not dramatically high. They didn't move much, a couple of percent. So, this strategy of Biden's hasn't worked. And just to come back to Trump dismantling NATO. Now, you Democrats always talk about, not you, Sasha, as a Democrat, but you Democrats, there's only one there, Mark, always talk about people paying their fair share. Interesting. So Donald Trump comes in and he says, hey, listen, NATO was created to restrain the power of the USSR. And like a toddler, he goes, if there's no USSR, why do we need NATO? And, the Europe was sort of stood there aghast and said, how could you ask such a thing? But nobody had an answer for him. And
I have an answer to it.
And then he said, well, if we're going to continue to have NATO and all these countries are participants of NATO and are beneficiaries of NATO, why is the American taxpayer the only one paying for it or disproportionately paying for it? Why don't you guys pay your fair share? But of course, the Democrats said, no. Fair share means the rich pay for it all. And we, America, are rich, so we'll pay for everything. That wasn't dismantling NATO. That was holding other countries to account, which any president worth his salt should have done.
You know something, Shaquille? I agree with you. In fact, I wrote an article about this on my blog. But basically, I went out and I took a look at the different costs that NATO was putting against. We were paying, well, we're still paying now. We were paying 75% of NATO's cost. 75%. Germany, who's the richest nation in Europe, and literally it is the richest nation in Europe, was paying like nothing. And everyone was paying nothing. And we were paying, and a lot of people said to go, Chris, you're being awfully judgmental here. I said, wait a minute. I was the first Air Force officer to direct a NATO cell in Europe, and all the equipment was given to that NATO cell by the U.S. The NATO people in that cell spent $0 for hardware, software, secure comms, everything. We set up that cell. Now, it was in a NATO building and it was in a NATO room, but let me tell you something. We paid for it all. And one of the NATO countries, we gave them software. One of NATO's countries came up and says, I'm sorry, but we need Corel Draw. And I said, why do you need Corel Draw for? We have all the different software here. Corel Draw was made in their country. So they wanted the U.S. to spend on their software because it was made in their country. And, we did. We just did. We did that because it was like, fine, we'll just do it because we want to be nicey. So we spent millions on that thing. And, yeah, it was good, and it got all the and to tell the truth, the NATO people that were there were fantastic, except for the French. I didn't like them, as you know. But the bottom line is, everybody else was, they worked as a team, everything was good, and life was good. But we paid for that whole thing. So since 1949, when NATO was formed, we have been the fulcrum behind that whole country. And something else about the French, you know what the two languages are in NATO? Two languages, English and French. You have to do everything in English and French. When I did reports, I had to do them in English and French. Why did I have to do them in French? But that's NATO, OTAN. You have OTAN at the bottom. You know what that is? That's NATO in French. Cut me a break.
Chris, it's way better than if it put them in English and Russian. Okay?
It should be Russian, yeah.
If I could just add something very quickly to the comment made about the disproportionate amount of funding that the US is giving to NATO and a number of other international organizations. Anybody who just, don't take my word for this, just go and look up who contributes what to the special drawing rights of the IMF and which countries are the recipients.
Yeah.
And you once again find that the US taxpayer is stuck paying for this, and yet you've got American schools that are producing children who are failing and falling behind their peers around the world. You've got a healthcare system that apparently is not operating as well as it could be for every American person. You've got all these things that American people want, and yet the tax dollars that are frittered away on, to keep the international community happy. If the US is such a powerful country, they should absolutely stand up to other nations and say, Now, just wait a moment. We helped you and saved you during World War II. We're not paying this forever. It's time to pay your fair share. It's time to contribute equally. And I don't mind a president that does that, Sasha. So for all the criticism that can be leveled at Trump, I'm no fan of Trump's, but I don't think he is the, subhuman maggot that you people would describe him as.
Is he subhuman? That's what you said?
That's what he just said. That was his words. But I did have a question for both.
Of the earth, this KKK, racist, sexist, chauvinistic, everything is an orange alien. All these terrible things said about Donald Trump. But I don't mind the man because he wasn't a politician.
You're right.
You're right. He kept his promises as much as he could. He said what he was going to do. He went ahead and did them.
Great,
and he engaged with his people, and he engaged with the media that hated him.
I will go further. Trump is brilliant casino operator. Trump is brilliant scientist who run Trump University. Trump is a brilliant money operator and real estate scams around the world, including Toronto, Canada. He scammed people.
Sasha, what I'll say to you is if you have a look at the Forbes list, almost everybody on there who's successful and entrepreneurial has had many failures in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, politicians have their failures, but they're only political failures. Like Hillary Clinton's got a big list of political failures. I don't hold that against her too much because we all have our failures and we learn from it. So Donald Trump has his failures. He's done a few things he should have done. He's done things that I have said I don't agree with. I don't think it's fair to leave small family-owned contractors holding the bag while you pull a bankruptcy stunt with the banks and then you leave because it wasn't just the banks that can afford to absorb it. You hurt a lot of very small family-owned businesses, and that's not on in my eyes. I don't approve of that. I don't think that's right. But if you want to go back and look at every single thing that Donald Trump has done wrong, that's fine. But you have to do the same thing for the politicians that you claim to prefer. And Joe Biden's history hasn't exactly been a great one. No politician would have a great one. What's the thing? Anybody who lives in a glass house shouldn't throw stones. There is nobody who's perfect. I'm just going to focus on policy and whether what he did was more good or more bad for America. And I think he did more good than bad.
Please admit that he's the first president in the modern history who resisted peaceful transition of power. He came up with a theory of a big lie about the stolen election. And he's been 60 times in courts in the United States where he hasn't proved even a penny of whatever he was alleging. And he was being thrown out of court sometimes even because his material didn't have any merits, whatever he submitted. He has a horrible call to Georgia election for additional 11,780 votes.
Hey, Shaquille, Sasha, Sasha, wait a minute.
Ask me a question. Let me respond to your question. Should I admit that he was the first president? No, I'm not going to admit that. Let me tell you why. Firstly, there were things that happened in that election that made it have the appearance of impropriety, even if none was later found. The appearance of impropriety is something that diminishes faith in the election. Had they have conducted that election better, had they have not, made the, denied poll watchers access and all those sorts of things, had they have handled things a lot better, there wouldn't be the suspicion. There wouldn't be the 4 o'clock in the morning. There's a 400,000 increase in the vote count in states. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, he was leading. The counting closed the next morning before the polls open. It's jumped. Of course, people are going to have some questions. This wasn't all Donald Trump's doing. But when it comes to the appearance of impropriety, this is exactly the same kind of thing that you would say about Al Gore. Al Gore had every right to essentially accuse Republicans and specifically the Bush family of having done something to that election when it came down to Florida, and you had those what were they, chads, whatever they were
hanging chads,
the hanging chads. Okay, it doesn't look good. The Florida state governor is George Bush's brother or cousin or whatever. It doesn't look good. And of course, Democrats at that time had every right to feel as though something wasn't right with that election. Now, I'm fair enough to say I can understand why Democrats would have felt that that wasn't right, just like I'm fair enough to say I can understand why some Republicans and Tea Partiers may be thinking, hey, this wasn't right, what happened in these elections. You've got to hold things to the same
Well,
extent.
Shaquille, wait a sec. Shaquille, wait a sec. Enough. Enough is enough. Gore went a legal route. He presented his case. He went up to the Supreme Court, but he never incited the insurrection. He never resisted peaceful transition of power. He challenged. So Trump did. He went to 6 courts. He lost every single one of them. So why don't you hire a decent lawyers? Prepare your case or shut up. Okay.
You are concluding that Donald Trump incited the riot, which is your way of looking at it. Not everybody agrees with that. In fact, half of America doesn't agree with that. Okay? So I listen to his words. He never said that. And his main legal challenge was, does Pence really need to certify the election?
No, absolutely not. The resurrection of January 6th was prepared several days and weeks prior to that. It was well-planned action. And we will find out in the next couple of weeks, maybe months, but very soon, I would say before May 1st, we will find all the details, how it was planned. It was a coup. It was a plan that was based on Donald Trump stay in power.
Well,
in spite of losing 7 million votes in election and the
How are they ever going to find that one out? It's going to be a little bit difficult to explain, given that Hillary Clinton's campaign are now known for having spied not only on his campaign, but on him when he was in the White House. And how much media coverage is there about that? Nothing. Lieutenant Colonel.
So wait, hey, Sasha, wait a minute. I get it. You know, Shaquille, what you have to do is you have to take a look at Sasha, and you have to say to yourself, okay, where does Sasha's history come from? Look, he was in the Soviet Union, where dictators were literally taking votes and making it themselves. You know, I'm not saying that Sasha sees dictatorship in everything, but what he sees is things that you and I don't see. You and I see, we are democracy. We take a look and we say, look, this is, we need a fair election. This is what we need. This is how we work it. So your ability to do that and say, look, this is what we need to do. And by God, we're going to do it. We're going to go to court. We're going to make sure that we do it right. We're not going to blame somebody for an insurrection. We're going to, make sure that everything is fair. Sasha sees it from his perspective. And this, Sasha, please tell me if I'm wrong, but Sasha sees it as, look, I've seen this happen. I saw it happen in the Soviet Union. Boris Yeltsin. I saw Boris Yeltsin, I saw, and I don't know whether you were there at that time or not, Sasha, I saw the parliament being hit by tank shells. You talk about an insurrection. There was parliament being shelled by a tank,
Yes,
so I mean,
1993.
So all these situations happen, and Sasha he's in Canada, but I've talked with him, and I know his heart is still in Russia. I mean, he sits back and he goes, that's my home country. That's what I've done, and I don't want to see the U.S. end up like Russia or the Soviet Union. Now, Shaquille, and I know that it's not going to be that way. The United States has
Chris,
been
let me just
for
say to you,
centuries.
Sasha and I are very good friends off air. The things that we agree on, we agree on. The things that we don't agree on, we really don't agree on. The thing is that Sasha's dislike for Donald Trump predates the election. He didn't like Donald Trump last year, or I think we were the year before when we were on air. Sasha doesn't like Donald Trump, and that's fine. Like David K. Johnson doesn't like Donald Trump. Okay, that's fine. I've got no problems with that. But I think that, look, I don't particularly like Joe Biden. I especially don't like him with what he's done with Afghanistan. However, if you have a look at what I said about Joe Biden a couple of days ago and what he would say is political strategy and all those sorts of things, I put aside my personal dislike for for Joe Biden and some of the policies I don't like. And I talk just about policies, and I talk about what he's done well and what he hasn't done that well, because you have to be able to do that. And I think that when I never hear anything positive about Donald Trump, you have to understand that half the country and probably half the world, because politics is a razor-thin edge, right? Half the people are going to like it, half the people aren't, right? So that's why if you're a celebrity, you really shouldn't go to politics, because half the people aren't going to like you anymore. So, you know, I just feel like when we keep blaming things on Donald Trump, what ends up happening is that it ends up being linked to Donald Trump supporters and conservatives in general and that sort of stuff. And that is a far quicker slippery slope down to the kind of environment that you are attributing to Sasha's history than you know, just simply looking at both sides of the equation and seeing what's right and what wasn't right.
Shakil, I'd like to respond very quickly. Number one, Trump is an authoritarian leader, has nothing to do with democracy, and he's admirer of all authoritarian leaders around the world. Look at Putin, look at a North Korean leader whom he fell in love with and traveled thousands of miles to meet him. Just let me
those are your opinions. Those are your opinions.
Hold on. I'm voicing my opinions only. I never voice anybody's opinion. It's my personal opinion, and I own them, and I responded, and I'm responsible for that 100% for my own opinion. Now, there were several transitions of powers and several elections. Should we concede to a thought that all elections were honest or almost honest? Election of Ronald Reagan and Bush Senior and Bush Jr. And anyway, well, Gore had some problems with election of Bush Jr., right? So he went to courts. He presented his case, it went up to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court stopped the count of voices in Florida, and Gore backed down and conceded to Bush presidency. He never prepared an insurrection and fight for power like Trump did. What Trump did is absolutely extraordinary, and it will not be forgotten, and it will be qualified for what it is and dealt with accordingly. And
but
we'll
once
see
again,
fairly soon.
Sasha, once again, you've made some comments which are your opinion, that he was authoritarian,
Absolutely.
he fell in love with worldwide dictators.
Yes.
Then you've jumped over to and what he did with the election, etc.
Okay.
etc.
Yeah.
Now you attribute the January 6 riots to Donald Trump. You say that he was
Absolutely. He was in charge of it all. And not just on January 6th, but weeks and months prior to that. He was organizing everything with his enablers who just did.
You've already said that, so I'm acknowledging what you've said. Okay. Yeah. So you attribute that to him. Yeah. Not everybody does. Okay.
I don't.
Because you attribute that to him, you then go on to say that his challenge of those results wasn't right. Now let's just go back a little bit. Let's talk about things from the legal perspective. He questioned whether or not Pence was allowed to not certify the election results. I actually don't know. I don't know constitutional law well enough, actually. I think that would be a very interesting question. Maybe he didn't have to. But let's go back. When he beat Hillary Clinton, there was a whole heap of actors and sports stars and Democrats that came out and said, don't certify the election. Okay? They did the same thing. And questionable election results and allegations that something was stolen or rigged or unfair isn't exactly unique. The electoral system in the United States has had its problems in the past, as every country has, and they've had to grow. One only has to go and look at the 1960 election of JFK. There was all sorts of mayhem about that. And the people at that time said the same thing. This will never be forgotten. But I can guarantee you walk around America today and say, how many people, what do you guys think about the turmoil with JFK? They wouldn't know what you're talking about. So this is not going to be something that's a real big deal in 20 or 30 years' time. But I could understand why, and it wouldn't have just been him. It would have been a lot of people who voted for him, a lot of people that saw Biden didn't come out to very many rallies. When he did, there wasn't many people there. Trump's rallies were electrifying, and he's a great showman. So, there's all sorts of things going on at his rallies. And all of a sudden, he's ahead. It looks like he's going to win. The media is very despondent about it, saying, "Oh, look, looks like we're going to lose this, etc., etc." The next morning, it's Democratic jubilation when election votes are counted and dropped in at 4:00 in the morning. There's memes and all sorts of stuff on the internet. Of course, people are going to think that something went wrong. And then between that and the time of January 6th, of course, people got pretty worked up about it.
So I think let's get down to facts. First of all, Trump used the words in his speech, "fight like hell." He says, you got to go there and fight like hell. Well, were those words ever used before? Yes, they were used by Schumer,
as his lawyer said,
Schumer in the front of Supreme Court. He said, "You've got to fight like hell." I mean, he used the exact same words, except before January 6th. Now, there was no insurrection of the Supreme Court, but let me tell you something. If there would have been 1 or 2 or 20 or 100 people that would have stormed the Supreme Court, I don't know how that would have played out in the press. I think that would have played out like, look, people are upset about this, and they're going to go in the Supreme Court and do whatever. So I think you have to take a look at who was behind the insurrection, and I am all for that.
It's a righteous fight. If the Democrats do it, it's a righteous fight. When Stacey Abrams says that she's really the governor of Georgia and the election was stolen, she's absolutely right, and it must be because of racism, and so people should riot in the streets and loot and burn buildings down. That's because they're on the side of God. They're righteous. But if you are on the wrong side of politics and you do it, oh, heaven, you're the worst person ever. You're a racist. You're a thug. You're a this. You're a that. And then people go, well, I wonder why America's so divided. I just can't work out why.
May I ask you, do you remember how and when his presidency or ascent to presidency started? Remember this elevator ride in the tower, and there were hundreds of people cheering, and do you know all these people were paid actors?
Oh,
they were paid $50 a piece.
Kennedy did the same thing. Kennedy did the exact same thing.
Absolutely.
Hillary Clinton comes out in every campaign rally. She comes out and she does this thing where she points over there and she waves and she smiles. And it was accidentally slipped that this was a strategy that the Democrats had used to make it look like she knew lots of people, and Democrats have been doing that for a long time.
Okay, then
what should I adjust from the fact that there were actors?
Okay, guys, I'm not here to fight you. I'm looking now.
I was enjoying it, Sasha.
I'm looking.
It was a joke.
In Russian army, there was one very important rule. First shoot, then ask the question. Remember that. Now, I would like to ask you.
Carl Rittenhouse got in trouble for that, didn't he? No, don't get me started.
Don't go there.
I'm just trying to wide mark up now.
But let me understand something then. Okay, Trump is a great leader, and he's the greatest thing since Jesus Christ and so on.
Well, I didn't say that.
You didn't. How come?
Why I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that to anybody. I wouldn't say that about anybody.
But my
Margaret
question
Thatcher did a fantastic job, but she had her
Yeah,
faults.
let's be fair. Trump is now, there is no Republican Party, as we know. It's a party of Trump. So Trump has a great influence on Republican Party and the base. Now, when we're talking about the base, we're talking about 70-some million people and so on. So now, when all the West is being united against Putin's aggression, he now says that he's a genius and he openly supports Putin's case. How would you qualify that if not a treason? What is it?
Well, hang on. Simply making a statement about the strategy of another world leader hardly qualifies as treason. I mean, I think so. I think there's some other things going on in the United States that are much more treasonous amongst public officials than that. But again, I'm no fan of Donald Trump's. I'm not. I just look at the policies that he had and whether his presidency and the economic impacts of his policies and the things that he did while he was there was more good or bad. And I think it was more good, except for the race-obsessed identity politics a crowd. Other than them, everybody else benefited. Even they benefited. Okay, I don't think there was very many Americans that were worse off in 2019 or 2018 than what they were in 2016. Now, I'm only saying 2018 and 2019 because COVID obviously had a significant impact on the world. And again, he gets blamed for that. But Biden, when you've got more deaths under Biden, oh, no, there's no problems with that. I think we should hold our political leaders to account, all of them, the ones we like and the ones that we don't. And we also need to give credit where credit's due. I agree with a lot of the criticism, not all of it, but a lot of the criticism that you level at Donald Trump. But not everything is Donald Trump's fault. And you have to acknowledge that Joe Biden's handling of Afghanistan has been an absolute disaster. And Joe Biden's handling of Russia so far has been a disaster.
No.
Where is the sense in shutting down the Keystone pipeline, okay, and then allowing the Nord Stream pipeline to be built, giving the green light to that and building it around the Ukraine? Where is the sense in that? And when the United States has an increase in its demand on oil, it pushes oil prices up around the world. So you've got people in Australia that have to pay more, but more importantly, people in the poorest nations on earth have to pay more for their transportation, for their food and clothing, and et cetera, because of a decision that Joe Biden has made. I mean, I think criticism on Joe Biden is warranted. Even if you're
I'm not a defender of Joe Biden. He hasn't paid me anything, so why would I defend him at all?
I wasn't paid anything by Donald Trump, and everyone thinks I'm a defender of his. I'm not a defender of his. I just think we should treat things fairly. And I'm certainly not being paid by the Conservatives of Canada to criticize that nimwit Trudeau that you've got in there. I mean, what is going on in Canada
thinks that he's a nimwit.
And I'm very interested to hear under what theory of fairness and everything that Chris said about what you saw in the USSR before you came to Canada to build a better life, what parts of what Trudeau is doing do you approve of? Do you really think that Trudeau's actions are justified? Seizing assets, locking people up, seizing and freezing bank accounts of people that donated to GoFundMe. Because before they passed a law that you couldn't do that, all of a sudden now they can retrospectively do it. I mean, do you approve of all of this?
Listen, Shaquille, I don't agree with Trudeau on almost anything. I'm not a fan of his. I never voted for him. It's bigger than Trudeau. Remember that Canada is a country of law and order. Now, this protest, if it's just a protest against the coronavirus treatment and laws and regulations or so on, it's one thing. But if for a month they blocked the capital of Canada, they blocked Ambassador Bridge, where there is a 25% of all trade between US and Canada happens through Ambassador Bridge back and forth. So if they blocked them, they inflicted billions, if not $10 billion worth of damage to both US and Canada, but Trudeau, of course, cares.
Okay, so they've done all these terrible things.
Then
So
what was the way to deal with that?
What he's done. Not what he's done. If you don't evoke wartime measures, something that is there for when there's a major national
catastrophe. Then should have just stay, be nice, and say, it's okay. So it will go on for another 3-4 months. Okay, so you use more.
What you do is you address the concerns of the, again, almost half of Canada that agrees with that issue. Okay,
he's right.
Almost half of Canadians that are polled are saying they agree with the principles that the truckers are protesting on, but they think maybe it's gone on too long.
In Ontario,
very few people in Canada, based on the poll results, agree with this kind of heavy-handed tactic being used by Prime Minister Trudeau. It's an outrage.
Listen, Shaquille, this is a very minor issue, whether it was heavy tactic or half heavy or a little bit heavy or whatever. It's not issue. The issue is that the group of people incited by professional organizers who have nothing to do with the tracking, they all of a sudden make a paralyzed life in the capital of Canada. Trade Ambassador Bridge was killed for a month. That's not the way to tolerate. That's
Okay.
that's worse than
Sasha,
war.
you're right. Let's go back. Shaquille, wait.
They should have
Just let me
had their
respond.
concerns
Let me
They
Chris
tried to bring
has
them up,
something
and
he
he
wants to
and his family fled like the cowards that they are.
No.
They fled rather than addressing them. That's why this thing got out of control.
So let's go back to railway. Okay, let's go back to the railroad strike of the 1940s, early 1950s. So the railroads in the United States struck, right? They decided they were going to strike because they had enough of, they wanted better pay, they wanted whatever. So all the railways struck in I think it was 1950, 1951, whatever it was. So they did on, right? So they did that. So Truman said he tried everything. And Sasha, I think that's what Shaquille is saying. Look, you got to address that stuff. He should have gone out to the truckers. I'm serious. Trudeau should have gotten out of his freaking ivory tower, gone to the truckers and said, look, I get it. You guys are upset. Tell me what I can do without the situation of like having to say we're going to get away with all this vaccination stuff, because vaccinations are saving lives. So tell me what I can do to be able to make this thing happen. Now, Truman did that with the railway strike, right? Well, they said, screw you, Truman. We want more pay. If you don't give us more pay, up your wazoo. We're not going to do anything. This went on and on. You know what Truman did? He said, I want to address a joint session of Congress. He went to the joint session. He had a speech prepared. The speech, and he let it leak out that he had a speech prepared. And the speech said, every single railway worker is going to be drafted into the armed forces. And he had it all set, ready to go. He was starting to speak, and all of a sudden, a messenger came up and handed him something. And he says, ladies and gentlemen, I have good news. The railway strike is over. Mm-hmm. That's it. So, I mean, Democrats, Republicans, when you get to a point where you've tried everything to try to break a strike or break a log jam, and it ain't happening, then you go to dire measures. In his case, he had the draft, and he said, we're going to draft every single one of you buggers. If you don't come off strike, you're going into the Army or Navy or Air Force or whatever you're going to go into. Every single one of you are going to do that.
Okay, Chris, number one, sure. I agree with you that Trudeau has not handled that the best possible way. Actually, he treated it in an awful way, and a lot of problems were created by his mistreatment of the truckers. I agree with that, and I always said that, and you know that I'm not a big fan of Trudeau, not even a little fan, no fan, period. Number two, that does not justify what the truckers and their organizers did. Absolutely not.
But
Trudeau is a bad man, fine, but you cannot paralyze the country and inflict enormous damages.
But what the truckers are doing is Trudeau's political failure. What Trudeau should do is
but Trudeau did not inflict the damages. Truckers Truckers started that all and let it go for a month. Now it's in second month. So in this case, okay, Trudeau made a mistake. Okay, he's a bad man, he's a stupid man, made a mistake. Okay, fun enough. What he's a worse than Hitler and Stalin and Genghis Khan. Agree with that as well. But that not justify what the truckers did.
Hang on.
That's true.
Unlike the beloved moron who's in charge of Canada, I don't diminish what happened in World War II by comparing people like him to Hitler or to the Nazis, as he tried to insinuate about the leader of the opposition, or the deputy leader of the opposition, when he said to her, the granddaughter of a Jew, that she can go and stand with the swastika flying protesters in Ottawa. Outrageous conduct. what he should do is he should stand down, because it's not his first political failure. He's had many political failures that have upset the Canadian people in the past. He has refused to answer questions to the Commissioner of Conflict of Interest Commissioner. He's had all sorts of things that's happened under his prime ministership. And if his decisions have led to this kind of revolt, he should step down. Now, to answer your question, it's not just that he's made a mistake. The thing is, he hasn't tried to rectify the mistake. In no way, shape, or form has he or his government said that they're going to do anything to appease the concerns that were brought. So the concerns that were brought forth still exist. All he's going to do is use force or the threat of force to disperse the truckers' protest. But what they're complaining about, which is the vaccine mandate in order to cross between the United States and Canada, that issue still remains. Now, it's okay if you believe that, hey, I've been vaccinated, who cares? But for a very big percentage of people that don't want to be, that issue remains. And it doesn't just remain in Canada. It is all over the world. There's been protests in Wellington, the capital of New Zealand. And Jacinda Ardern, who I'm not a fan of hers either, but she hasn't taken those sorts of actions. We've had truckers that were circling Canberra, the capital of Australia. We haven't taken those actions in Australia. There's been similar sort of actions all through Europe. The only country that has decided to invoke wartime emergency powers to use against its citizenry is Canada. And it is a blight on modern history of Western countries.
Shaquille, number one, Canada is a country of law and order. Number two, Trudeau's government was elected just 5 months ago in September of 2021. So majority of Canadians, which I'm not, but majority elected Trudeau and his government, and because of few trackers that were excited by the unlawful organizers, do you think they can topple the government of Canada, even ones that I don't like? I'm against it.
It's not about topping the government, but also the majority of Canadians didn't vote for Trudeau. What did he win? 33%.
Majority, 80% of people in Ontario, where I live, they were against trackers and their actions.
He got 35% of the popular vote, because you guys have got a rather interesting a system there compared to other Westminster systems. So it's not like he's Mr. Popularity over there in Canada. And you say you're a country of law and order. Well, I think some of those maple syrup producers in Quebec might feel a little bit differently, given what the maple syrup cartels are able to do over there. Slightly off the topic, but law and order is one thing. But when a prime minister or a president can sit there and suspend laws, like Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus because he wanted to try to force the South to continue paying 98% of US taxes. I think those sorts of leaders should be criticized and ostracized.
But Shaquille, I want to just tell you one interesting thing. If it wouldn't be for social media, that trackers' actions would be absolute nothing. We wouldn't even discuss that here. So trackers, they went there and they were sent back, and that's it. Because of social media, it became a big movement to actually topple Trudeau's government. And I'm not fan of Trudeau, but I'm against such an action.
Sasha, if it wasn't for social media, if we weren't so technologically advanced, all sorts of things are different. But I still think the protests would exist. It's just that you would have 10,000 horse and carts. There'd be manure everywhere. The place would smell. So thank you, lucky stars, that we have actually advanced as humanity the way that we have.
Yeah, it's a good thing we've advanced. It's about time to wind things down. This has been a very lively discussion y'all have had and everything. I do have to tease Chris about something, because he's really got this anti-thing against the French and everything. And I was actually going to mention my folks that are into African history, because I did not get to those today. So my two folks for today. And by the way, one of them is a correction from yesterday, because Bobby Seals was one of the Black Panthers, but the other one that did join the Republican Party was Eldridge Cleaver. So he was a member of the Black Panthers that then became a Republican. So that is the one that I was trying to think of. So if you're interested in learning more about this great historical figure, you might want to read about him. And of course, read about Baldwin, who was an expatriate. And that's why I was going to tease Chris Greco about, because a lot of the Harlem folks that were going through a lot of things during the Harlem Renaissance. When they were having issues with racism, they did decide to go to France because they found themselves more welcomed in France than in the U.S. at that particular time. So that is the time that we ran off to France. So France does have some positive history with at least
the French only did that to piss off America. They didn't do it because they love you guys. They did it because the French are very French.
They're very French, and they wanted to do what they could to definitely piss off folks. I can agree with you on that as well. And the other thing I was going to teach Shaquille about it before we get ready to get these images and everything is, and we can get on this tomorrow, is the whole question of whether the Black middle class has had a better experience during Trump or not, because there's actually been some studies that have said that that is not the case, that the Black middle class has been having some very hard times during the area of Trump and all of that. But like I said, we can talk about this tomorrow, because they said for a quarter of white families have a net worth
this study I assume is being sponsored by the progressive wing
of all households, and only 4% of Black families can say the same. So let's think about that until we get back tomorrow and everything, because we can bring that up tomorrow as well.
There's not much to think about a study that's sponsored by the progressive wing of the Democrats, especially if it came from academia, right? Where all these progressives hang out. I wouldn't pay too much attention to it.
Well, like I said, and then I'm curious tomorrow to also hear from Chris what his thoughts are about the UN's top court and its powers, since y'all were talking about top powers and all of that, because apparently lawyers for Gambia earlier today were urging that top court to throw out Myanmar's legal bid to end the case, accusing the Southeast Asian nation of genocide against the country's minority population. So we know we oftentimes hear about the Supreme Court, and apparently the folks over there in the UN court are trying to wield some power, even though it's my understanding they don't have much power at all. But definitely we can have that conversation tomorrow as well. But right now, you're to bring up those lovely images of people running in and out and around during the before pandemic era and all of that. And then we will get to see Economics Monday, because that is going to take place, and Media Monday at noon. So I know some of y'all are heading over to Economics Monday. But right now, let's get on out of here.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had the wrong day.
Thank you.
Hey, my mind has been. Thanks for
love you guys.
Yeah, love you.